Without doubt, the most popular fast prime focal length on the market has to be 50mm. I guarantee pretty much everyone at some point has owned something like a cheap 50mm f1.8 lens. Well, today we are taking a look at what I think could be the cheapest fast 50mm lens for full frame cameras on the market. And it's this, the Meike 50mm f1.7. Just how cheap, you ask? Well, currently it's on Amazon UK for £109. That's pretty cheap, to be fair. Now, why is this so cheap? Well, it's a fully manual lens for starters. Not only is it manual focus and manual aperture, there's no electronic contact on the back either, so you get no EXIF data or anything. While the body itself is made of metal and actually feels pretty good, really, for a £100 lens. It feels pretty solid. The lens hood is really cheap plastic. I don't particularly like this lens hood. Really, I don't like it because it doesn't actually click into place. It shakes around quite a lot. So, not a particularly brilliant lens hood, but the lens itself, like I said, does feel pretty solid. Now, the majority of the lens is taken up with the manual focus ring, which has a fairly long focus throw from infinity down to its minimum focus distance of just less than half a meter. So you're not going to get particularly close-up images with this, but the minimum focus distance is pretty average for fast 50mm. Just in front of the manual focus, you have the manual aperture ring, which lets you stop down from f1.7 down to f22. Now, I like declicked aperture rings on lenses, but I'll be honest, I'm not a particularly big fan of the implementation on this lens. It's very smooth to turn, but it's almost too smooth. Like, there's very little resistance there, which makes it quite easy to knock, especially considering the lens is quite small and it's very close to the focus ring. I've had a few occasions where I've gone to pull focus and I've accidentally caught the end of the aperture ring and I've nudged the aperture. And because it's a declicked aperture, you don't really notice that you've done it. And there's not a huge amount of rotation to the aperture ring either. And most of that rotation takes you from f1.7 down to f8. And then the very last millimeter or two takes you from f8 all the way down to f22, which realistically probably won't bother most people, because I imagine most people who would consider this lens are probably going to be shooting with faster apertures anyway. The size and weight of the lens is pretty much perfect for an A7 series body. It balances very, very nicely. When you turn the focus ring, the front of the lens barrel does extend out slightly, but it doesn't rotate, so it's not going to affect you if you're using, say, a polarizing filter. And speaking of filters, it's a 52mm front filter thread. So along with the lens being cheap, the filters are going to be pretty affordable for it as well. Now, in terms of image quality, let's be honest, it's a £110 lens. It's not going to rival, say, the Sony 55 1.8. But it is pretty respectable given the price tag. The center of the frame, even at f1.7, is pretty sharp but lacks a little bit of contrast. As you stop the lens down, it does get progressively sharper and the contrast does improve as well. The corners, however, are a bit of a letdown. They're quite soft at f1.7 and they don't really get to decent sharpness until around f5.6. Although in fairness, again, most people who are considering this lens probably will be shooting at wider apertures and probably won't have any subjects in focus in the corner of the frames to even know whether the corners are sharp or not. The lens also exhibits quite a lot of vignetting at f1.7, again not uncommon for cheap fast 50mm lenses, and it does clear up quite noticeably by f2.8. Also not a surprise for a £110 lens, it does exhibit quite a bit of flaring. Now really the bigger letdown for this isn't the fact that it shows flaring. You kind of expect that, but the flaring even shows itself when the lights aren't in the frame, which again is kind of personal preference. Some people like having flare in the images and other people hate having flare. It's entirely up to you. So is it the best lens on the market? No. But then for £110, I don't think anyone was expecting it to be. But overall for the price, I do think it's a pretty good performing lens. It certainly got the build quality exceeding what I was expecting. I thought there'd be a lot of plastic, which there isn't. The image quality, again, for a £110 lens, I was not expecting particularly brilliant image quality. And in terms of the corner sharpness and the flaring, that's pretty much where I was expecting it to be. But the center sharpness is better than I was expecting. And really for a lens like this, it's the center sharpness that I think is generally more important than the corner sharpness. Sure, the lens hood feels pretty cheap plasticky, but again, that's to be expected. The only letdown for the lens hood for me is the fact that it doesn't lock in place. I wish it would be a bit more rigid. My biggest criticism of this lens, however, is the aperture ring. Now, a declicked aperture ring, especially if you're shooting video, a great feature to have, and some people might absolutely love it. For me, the biggest letdowns for this, however, is, like I said, one, the fact that because it's so smooth to turn and so close to the focus ring, it's dead easy to catch it by mistake and knock it, and you might not notice it. And the second is the fact that the throw is so short and the markings aren't particularly clear. Personally, I wish the aperture ring had a bit more dampening to it, in probably the same as you get from the focus ring, and I wish that the throw was slightly longer and the markings were further apart and better defined. But overall, if you're looking for a budget-friendly, fast 50mm lens for full-frame cameras, I think this is a good option to at least consider, and I will leave links to this lens in the description down below. But what do you reckon? Do you think this is a good option to consider, or do you think there's a better budget 50mm on the market? Leave your thoughts and comments in the box down below. While you're down there, if you enjoyed this video or you found it helpful, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button. There's also my Patreon account down there where you can help support the channel from $5 a month, and in return you'll get some exclusive behind the scenes content and access to prize competitions as well. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.